There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you realize, all at once, that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally have quietly ranked you beneath a vacation. I felt that quiet settle into my chest on a Tuesday evening in March, sitting at my kitchen table with my phone lit up in front of me, staring at a family group chat that had just confirmed, casually, cheerfully, that my entire family would be on a cruise ship the exact week of my wedding. My name is Ren Castellan, and I was 29 years old when I learned that a Caribbean cruise mattered more to my family than watching me get married. I'd set my wedding date 8 months in advance, a Saturday in late September that I'd chosen carefully, checking with my mother, my father, my 2 brothers, my grandmother, every relevant family member I could think of, making absolutely certain the date didn't conflict with anything significant. Everyone had confirmed availability at the time. Everyone had seemed genuinely excited. Then, 7 months later, my mother, Dolores, mentioned almost in passing during a phone call that my Aunt Yvonne had found an incredible deal on a 7-day Caribbean cruise, a family reunion trip she'd been trying to organize for years. And the only week that worked for everyone's schedules happened to fall exactly on my wedding weekend. "I'm sure you understand, baby," my mother said, her voice carrying the particular breezy tone she used when she'd already decided something and simply needed me to accept it. "These deals don't come around often, and getting the whole family together like this, it's rare. You could always move your date, couldn't you? It's not like the venue's impossible to change." I sat with that suggestion for a long moment, genuinely uncertain I'd heard her correctly. "Mom, I've had this date locked in for 8 months. The venue's booked. The caterer's booked. My dress is already fitted. You're asking me to move my wedding around a cruise you just found out about." "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said, defensiveness creeping into her voice now. "I'm just saying, maybe you should have picked a better date to begin with, one that didn't put everyone in this position." A better date. As though the date itself had been the problem, rather than a family choosing, 7 months later, to prioritize a vacation over my wedding without a single moment's hesitation. I hung up that call feeling something crack open inside my chest. A fracture I didn't yet understand would eventually split my entire family life into a clear and permanent before and after. I need you to understand something about my family before this story makes complete sense, because the cruise wasn't actually where this pattern began. It was simply where it finally, undeniably crystallized into something I could no longer explain away. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother, Desmond, and my younger brother, Isaiah, in a family where attention had always distributed itself unevenly. Though I'd spent most of my life telling myself this was simply the ordinary chaos of a busy household rather than a deliberate pattern. Desmond had always been the golden child, athletic and charismatic, his achievements celebrated loudly and consistently throughout our childhood. Isaiah, the baby of the family, received the particular indulgent attention youngest children often collect, his mistakes forgiven easily, his successes celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. I occupied the space between them, competent and reliable in ways that somehow translated, over the years, into being overlooked rather than appreciated. I made good grades without fanfare. I held steady jobs without drama. I was, my mother liked to say, the one we never have to worry about, a compliment I understood now, with the clarity of adult hindsight, as its own quiet kind of dismissal. My father, Reginald, had always deferred to my mother on most family decisions, his passivity functioning as its own form of complicity even when he wasn't the one actively making choices that diminished me. My grandmother, Odessa, had been the one family member who'd always made me feel genuinely seen, though her health had declined significantly over the past 2 years, limiting how much she could advocate for me the way she once might have. I'd met my fiancé, Marcus Delaney, 3 years earlier, and our relationship had unfolded with a steadiness I'd never quite experienced within my own family, Marcus consistently, reliably prioritizing me in ways that felt, at first, almost unfamiliar given the patterns I'd grown up navigating. "Your family does this thing," Marcus observed once, gently, during our 2nd year together, "where they seem to assume you'll always understand, always adjust, always be fine with whatever arrangement is most convenient for everyone else. I've noticed it a few times now. Do you see it too? I hadn't wanted to see it, not fully, not until that Tuesday evening phone call about the cruise made the pattern impossible to keep explaining away. I sat at my kitchen table that night, replaying decades of similar moments, smaller versions of the same fundamental message: your needs matter less than everyone else's convenience. I had no idea yet exactly how completely that realization would reshape the following months of my life. Are you enjoying the story? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're enjoying it so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because believe me, this story is only getting started. Now, let's get back into it. I called a family meeting the following weekend, gathering my parents, both brothers, and Aunt Yvonne at my parents' house, determined to have one direct, honest conversation before deciding how to proceed. I need to understand something, I said, standing in my parents' living room, feeling steadier than I expected given the magnitude of the conversation ahead. Is anyone actually planning to attend my wedding, or has this cruise decision already been made for everyone? Aunt Yvonne, a warm but assertive woman who'd organized the trip, spoke first, her tone carrying genuine confusion at my apparent frustration. Ren, honey, we've been trying to get this family together for a proper vacation for years. Everyone's schedules finally aligned. I really don't understand why this has become such a dramatic issue. It's become an issue, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building steadily beneath my ribs, because you're choosing a vacation over my wedding. Those aren't equivalent events, Aunt Yvonne. One happens every year if you plan for it. The other happens once. Desmond, my older brother, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ren, come on, it's not that deep. Can you just do a smaller ceremony now and have a bigger celebration later when everyone's actually free? I already have a ceremony planned, I said, feeling something in my chest tighten further. 8 months of planning, Desmond. A venue. A caterer. A dress. You're asking me to dismantle all of that because a cruise deal happened to come up. Isaiah, my younger brother, remained mostly silent throughout this exchange, though his expression suggested he was, at minimum, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. My mother finally spoke, her voice carrying the particular exasperated tone I recognized from childhood, the tone that suggested I was being unreasonable simply by expecting different treatment. Ren, we love you. This isn't about not caring about your wedding. It's about a rare opportunity for family time that we can't easily recreate. I really think you're overreacting to this. Overreacting, I repeated slowly, feeling that word land with particular weight given how thoroughly it echoed patterns I'd absorbed for most of my life. My own family choosing a vacation over my wedding and telling me I should have picked a better date, and you think I'm overreacting by being upset about it. My father remained silent throughout the entire exchange, exactly as I'd expected, his passivity feeling, in that moment, like its own particular kind of answer. So no one is changing their plans, I said finally, watching the room's collective silence confirm what I already understood to be true. I left that house that evening with a clarity I hadn't expected to find, understanding precisely what I needed to do next. I spent the following weeks processing that family meeting alongside Marcus, who listened patiently while I worked through waves of anger, grief, and a complicated, lingering hope that someone in my family might eventually reconsider. You don't have to decide anything right now, Marcus told me one evening, holding my hand across our kitchen table, the same steady presence he'd offered consistently throughout our relationship. Whatever you decide about the wedding, about your family, I'm here either way. I just need you to know that. I called my grandmother, Odessa, during this period, needing her perspective given how much clearer her love for me had always felt compared to the rest of the family's more conditional attention. I wish I could tell you I'm surprised, she admitted, her voice weaker than it used to be but no less direct. Your mother has always struggled with prioritizing appropriately, baby. I love her dearly, she's my daughter, but she's never quite learned how to make everyone in this family feel equally valued. I'm sorry you're the one who's had to learn that lesson so completely. Will you be able to come to the wedding? I asked, almost afraid of the answer given her declining health. I wouldn't miss it, she said firmly. Cruise or no cruise, I'll be there, even if I need someone to wheel me down that aisle myself. Her certainty gave me something to hold on to during those difficult weeks, a single confirmed presence amid the larger family absence I was slowly, painfully accepting as permanent. I reached out individually to Desmond and Isaiah over the following month, hoping perhaps a private conversation might yield different results than the group confrontation had. Desmond remained firmly committed to the cruise, citing the rarity of family togetherness and gently suggesting, again, that I consider changing my date instead. Isaiah, to my genuine surprise, called me privately 3 weeks later. "I've been thinking about this a lot," he said, his voice carrying uncertainty I rarely heard from him. "I don't think I can miss your wedding, Ren. I know Mom's going to be upset, but you're my sister. That should matter more than a boat trip." I felt something loosen slightly in my chest hearing that, genuine relief tangling with continued grief about the rest of my family's unchanged plans. "Thank you," I told him honestly. "That actually means more than you probably realize right now." I had no idea, ending that call, exactly how the remaining months before my wedding would unfold, or how completely my mother's response to Isaiah's decision would reshape the family dynamics even further. My mother's reaction to Isaiah's decision arrived swiftly and, in retrospect, entirely predictably, though it still managed to surprise me with its intensity. "You're really choosing to abandon this family trip?" she asked him, according to the account he later gave me, her voice carrying genuine anger during a phone call that apparently lasted nearly an hour. "After everything Yvonne put into planning this, after we all agreed on these dates months ago?" "We didn't all agree," Isaiah told her, according to his own recounting of the conversation. "Ren's wedding was already planned before this cruise idea even came up. I don't think choosing my sister's wedding over a vacation should require this much justification, Mom." The fallout from that conversation apparently extended through the following weeks, my mother recruiting Aunt Yvonne and Desmond into a coordinated effort to convince Isaiah to reconsider, framing his decision as a betrayal of family unity rather than simple, reasonable prioritization of an irreplaceable event. I found myself, during this period, in the strange position of watching my own wedding become a battleground for family dynamics that extended far beyond just my personal disappointment. Watching Isaiah absorb pressure I recognized intimately from decades of similar family patterns. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this because of me," I told him during one difficult phone call, genuine guilt mixing with my continued anger at the underlying situation. "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "This isn't your fault, Ren. This is Mom finally getting pushback on a pattern she's probably been running for years without anyone calling her on it directly. I should have said something sooner, honestly, about things I've noticed happening to you specifically over the years." That admission from Isaiah, unprompted and genuine, provided unexpected clarity during an otherwise difficult period. Confirmation that the pattern I'd spent weeks second-guessing myself about had actually been visible to at least one other person within my family, even if he'd never previously found the words to name it directly. My father remained largely absent from these conversations, his passivity extending even through this escalating family conflict, a consistency that felt, by this point, less surprising and more simply confirmatory of everything I'd already understood about his role within our family's dynamics. 2 months before my wedding, my mother called me directly, her tone carrying a complicated mixture of frustration and what sounded, underneath the frustration, like genuine hurt. "I don't understand how this became such a divisive issue," she said. "I never meant to hurt you, Ren. I just wanted this family trip to happen." "I believe you didn't mean to hurt me," I said honestly. "But intention doesn't erase impact, Mom. You chose a vacation over my wedding, and when I pushed back, you told me I should have picked a better date. That's not something I can simply explain away just because you didn't consciously intend the hurt it caused." I had no idea, ending that call, exactly how the remaining weeks before my wedding would unfold, or how much more clarity I'd eventually find regarding exactly who deserved space in my life moving forward. The remaining months before my wedding passed in a strange blend of continued planning and gradual, painful acceptance regarding my family's absence. Marcus's family, by contrast, embraced the wedding planning with an enthusiasm that highlighted, uncomfortably, exactly how different genuine family support could look compared to what I'd experienced throughout most of my own life. His mother, Corinne, insisted on helping with dress alterations. His father, Elijah, offered to walk me down the aisle himself once he learned my own father remained non-committal about attending given the ongoing family tension. "You don't have to accept," Elijah told me gently, during a dinner where he first raised the offer, "but I'd be honored, Ren, if you'd consider it. You've become like a daughter to us these past 3 years, and I hate the thought of you walking that aisle without someone beside you who genuinely wants to be there." I sat with that offer for several days before finally, gratefully, accepting it, understanding it as one small but meaningful counterbalance to the larger family disappointment I continued processing. My grandmother's health, unfortunately, declined further during this period, complications from a long-standing heart condition requiring hospitalization just 6 weeks before my scheduled wedding date. I visited her regularly during that hospitalization, watching her fight, with characteristic stubbornness, to stabilize enough to attend the wedding she'd promised months earlier not to miss. "I made you a promise," she told me during one visit, her voice weaker but her determination undiminished. "Cruise or no cruise, sick or not sick, I intend to keep it." My mother, to her credit, visited Odessa regularly during this hospitalization as well, and I found myself, during several overlapping visits, navigating careful, strained politeness with a woman I no longer fully trusted, but hadn't yet found the resolve to completely cut off from my life. "I've been thinking a lot," my mother told me during one particularly quiet hospital visit, both of us watching Odessa sleep in her hospital bed. "About patterns, about how I've handled things in this family over the years. I'm not saying that to excuse the cruise decision. I'm saying it because I think there's more here than just one bad choice about scheduling." I didn't respond immediately, uncertain whether this represented genuine reflection or simply another attempt to soften accountability without fully accepting it. "I don't know what to do with that right now," I said honestly. "I appreciate you saying it. But I need to focus on my wedding, Mom, on Grandma's health, on everything actually in front of me right now. We can talk more about family patterns after all of that settles." I had no idea, leaving that hospital room, exactly how quickly circumstances would force a more complete reckoning than either of us had anticipated. My grandmother stabilized enough to be discharged 3 weeks before the wedding, though her doctors remained cautious about her overall prognosis. Careful conversations about her limited remaining time occurring quietly among family members who visited her during that period. I want to be honest that watching my grandmother's health decline while simultaneously navigating my family's continued absence regarding the wedding created a strange, layered grief I hadn't fully anticipated, old resentments and genuine, deepening sorrow tangling together in ways I found difficult to fully separate. Isaiah remained firm in his decision throughout this final stretch, though the tension with our mother continued simmering beneath most family interactions. Desmond, to my surprise, reached out privately 2 weeks before the wedding, his tone carrying something I hadn't expected from him. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his voice uncertain in a way I rarely heard from my confident older brother. "Isaiah's been pretty vocal about all this, and honestly, watching Grandma fight so hard just to be there for you, it's made me think harder about my own choices." "Are you saying you're changing your mind?" I asked, cautious hope threading through my voice despite months of accumulated disappointment. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "The cruise is already paid for, non-refundable at this point. But I've been talking to Marisol about maybe flying back early, missing the last 2 days of the trip if it means I can actually be there for you." I sat with that admission, recognizing genuine effort even within its imperfect, complicated shape. "That would mean a lot, Desmond. I'm not going to pretend it fixes everything that's happened. But it would mean something." My mother's position remained, disappointingly, unchanged throughout this final stretch, her commitment to the cruise apparently unshakable despite Isaiah's departure from the plan and Desmond's wavering consideration. "I've already paid for this trip," she told me during our final conversation before the wedding, her tone carrying defensive finality. "I know you're disappointed, Ren, but I can't simply throw away thousands of dollars at this point." "I'm not asking you to throw away money," I said, feeling something settle into calm, clarifying resolve I hadn't quite reached until that exact moment. "I stopped asking you to change your plans months ago, Mom. I'm just telling you, clearly, that your absence at my wedding is a choice, and I need you to understand I'm going to remember it as exactly that, a choice, not an unavoidable circumstance. She didn't have an immediate response to that observation, the silence between us carrying a finality I recognized, even as we spoke, as significant. I had no idea, ending that final conversation before my wedding day, exactly how completely my family's choices would ultimately shape the ceremony itself, or how prepared I'd finally become to walk that aisle regardless of who filled the seats behind me. My wedding day arrived on a clear, bright Saturday in late September, exactly as originally planned 8 months earlier. The venue decorated beautifully despite the complicated family circumstances surrounding it. My grandmother arrived first, insisting on being wheeled down the aisle before the ceremony began rather than waiting in a back room, determined to witness every possible moment of the day she'd fought so hard to attend. "I told you I'd be here," she said, gripping my hand tightly as I helped adjust her wheelchair near the front row. Cruise or no cruise, I meant every word of that promise. Isaiah arrived early as well, helping coordinate final logistics with a diligence that felt, given everything our family had navigated over the previous months, like its own quiet form of apology for patterns he'd only recently begun recognizing. Desmond, true to his tentative promise, arrived just before the ceremony began, having flown back early from the cruise as he'd suggested might be possible. His presence carrying complicated weight given how uncertain that commitment had remained until the final days beforehand. My mother, my father, and the remaining extended family who'd chosen the cruise did not appear. I want to be honest that I'd spent the morning of my wedding bracing myself for that absence, having released, somewhere during the previous difficult months, the last remnants of hope that circumstances might somehow shift at the final hour. Elijah, Marcus's father, walked me down the aisle exactly as he'd offered months earlier, his steady presence beside me carrying genuine warmth that helped counterbalance the ache of my own parents' absence. I remember specific details from that walk with unusual clarity, the particular quality of afternoon light filtering through the venue's windows, the sound of the string quartet Marcus and I had chosen together, the sight of Marcus waiting at the altar, his expression carrying such open, unguarded joy that something in my chest finally, fully settled despite everything my own family had chosen not to witness. I didn't look back toward the empty seats reserved for my parents during that walk down the aisle. I want to be clear that this wasn't performed indifference, some deliberate gesture meant to communicate anger or dismissal. It was simpler than that, more genuine. I had already, over the preceding months, done the difficult internal work of accepting their absence as their choice rather than my failure, and looking back toward seats I already knew would remain empty felt, in that specific moment, unnecessary. I married Marcus that afternoon surrounded by people who had genuinely, consistently chosen to show up for me, my grandmother's presence feeling like its own small miracle given her declining health. Isaiah and Desmond's presence carrying complicated but genuine meaning given everything our family had navigated to arrive at that moment. I had no idea, exchanging vows that afternoon, exactly how permanently that day would reshape my relationship with the family members who'd chosen not to attend. My grandmother passed away 4 months after my wedding, her heart condition finally overwhelming the stubborn determination that had carried her through that difficult final year. I found comfort, even amid genuine grief, in knowing she'd witnessed my wedding personally, had kept the promise she'd made me months earlier despite every obstacle standing between her and that commitment. My mother reached out repeatedly during the months following the wedding, her messages shifting gradually from defensive justification to something that eventually resembled genuine remorse. Though I remained cautious about how quickly I allowed that apparent shift to reshape our actual relationship. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said during a phone call roughly 6 months after the wedding, her voice carrying a heaviness I hadn't heard from her previously. "Watching you build such a genuinely happy marriage, watching how completely Marcus's family embraced you during exactly the moment my own family failed to, it's forced me to confront things about myself I'd rather have kept avoiding." "What kind of things?" I asked, cautious, but genuinely curious given the vulnerability in her tone. That I've never been particularly good at recognizing when my own convenience was costing someone else something significant, she admitted. I told myself, for years, that you were simply easier to manage than your brothers, that your resilience meant I didn't need to worry as carefully about your feelings the way I did about theirs. I understand now how much damage that pattern actually caused, not just with the wedding, but across your entire life. I sat with that admission for a long moment, feeling old grief and cautious, uncertain hope tangled together in complicated proportion. I appreciate you saying that, I told her honestly. But Mom, I need you to understand something important. I'm not interested in rebuilding our relationship quickly, or pretending the wedding didn't happen the way it happened. If you're serious about actually changing these patterns, I need to see that demonstrated consistently, over real time, not just through a single difficult phone call. That's fair, she said, and something in her tone suggested genuine acceptance rather than defensive pushback. I'm willing to do that work, Ren, however long it actually takes. My relationship with Desmond and Isaiah continued strengthening during this period, both of them making consistent, deliberate efforts to show up for me in ways that felt genuinely earned rather than performed. Small gestures accumulating steadily into something that finally resembled the sibling relationships I'd always hoped for but rarely fully experienced during childhood. I had no idea, navigating those complicated months of grief and cautious family rebuilding, exactly how differently my relationship with my parents would ultimately develop compared to my relationships with my brothers. It's been 3 years now since I walked down that aisle without looking back at the empty seats my parents had chosen to leave behind. 3 years since a Caribbean cruise revealed, definitively, exactly how my family had always quietly ranked my needs against everyone else's convenience. My marriage to Marcus has flourished during those years, built on the same steady, consistent foundation that first drew me toward him, a foundation that stood in stark, clarifying contrast to the conditional attention I'd spent most of my life accepting from my own family without fully recognizing it as inadequate. My relationship with my mother remains a work in progress, careful and gradual, built across 3 years of consistent, demonstrated effort on her part rather than simply words offered during difficult, emotional phone calls. We have dinner together every few months now, conversations that still occasionally carry old, complicated weight, but conversations nonetheless, built on boundaries I've learned to maintain rather than old patterns of automatic accommodation. My father and I have made less progress, his passivity apparently proving more difficult to shift than my mother's more active patterns, though he's begun, tentatively, reaching out more consistently than he ever did during my childhood. Small gestures I've chosen to accept cautiously rather than dismiss entirely. Desmond and Isaiah have become genuinely close relationships now, both of them having done real, sustained work to show up for me consistently in ways that finally match the sibling bond I'd always hoped existed beneath our family's earlier dysfunction. I think often about my grandmother, about her fierce determination to keep her promise despite failing health, about the particular clarity she offered me during those difficult months leading up to my wedding, understanding now, with the benefit of years of distance, exactly how much her unconditional support shaped my ability to walk that aisle with genuine peace rather than lingering bitterness. I never did receive an apology from my mother specifically regarding the cruise decision itself, not directly, not in those exact terms. What I received instead, gradually, across 3 years of careful rebuilding, was something perhaps more meaningful, demonstrated change, consistent effort, a genuine willingness to finally examine patterns she'd maintained for decades without adequate scrutiny. People ask me sometimes whether I regret walking down that aisle without my parents present, whether the empty seats still ache when I look back at wedding photographs from that September afternoon. I tell them the truth. I don't regret it, not anymore, though I understand why people might expect a more straightforwardly triumphant answer. What I learned that day, walking toward Marcus surrounded by people who'd genuinely chosen to show up, was something I'd needed my entire life to understand clearly. Love that requires you to shrink your own significance to accommodate everyone else's convenience isn't actually the unconditional love it claims to be. My family booked a cruise the same week as my wedding and told me I should have picked a better date. I picked myself instead, and I've never once looked back with regret at that particular choice. The end.